Hello everyone, welcome to chapter 2. Chapter 2 is the review of the cells, and this is another short chapter because first two chapters are relatively short because the first one was just introduction and this one is just a review because you have already taken general biology and talked about the cell. In general biology, you talked about all kinds of cells from bacteria cells to plant cells to fungi to animals. But since we're talking about the human body, we're going to focus specifically on the animal cell, and the reason why you have to review this is because in order to understand how some of the mechanisms in body works, we need to go back to some of the things in the cell, like the organelles and how stuff goes into the membranes and out of the membrane and things of all that kind. And there are a couple assignments, that we will be doing for this chapter. If you use the A&P, mastering A&P, then there will be some assignments that are called gap finders and that are going to review some of the materials that you learned from the previous course in general biology, and some of the gap finders you have to do has to do with the cell osmosis, organelles, and things of that sort. And so you can go ahead and complete those in A&P if we decide to use that. So okay, so there's two types of cells, and one of them is called the sex cells, and those are going to be the gametes. And in terms of humans, animals, we have gotten two kinds. We got the sperm cell in males, and we have the oocyte or the ovum in females. So the sperm cell, these are called spermocytes. And then sex cells, they have another name also called germ cells. So spermocytes are, so I don't know if I did this before, but let me type it for you. So cyte means cell. So spermocytes are going to be sperm cells. Spermocytes means sperm cell. The sperm cells are called spermatocytes. Spermatocytes, actually, it's not spermocytes. Right. So spermatocytes. Okay. Yeah, sorry about that. So sperm cells are called spermatocytes and they're gametes, and gametes refer to the sex cells. So these are gametes. Then you also have oocytes. The oo in this refers to the ovum. So let's see, ovum. And cyte again means cell. So ovum is the egg cell. And both of these male and female cells are going to be comprised of sex cells, which are the gametes. And then you should remember from general biology that gametes are going to be haploid. So gametes are going to be haploid, which is 1N. So which means you only have one copy of the chromosomes the sperm gives you, and that's the half from your dad, and the opposite gives you half, which is the oocyte or the mom side. When these two meet, that's called fertilization. Then you get back your diploid stage. So that should be a review from your general bio. And there, I said there were two major kinds of cells in your body. So one was the sex cell called the gametes. The other type is going to be called the somatic cells. So there's a big difference here that the gametes, these are going to be haploid or 1N, whereas the somatic cells are going to be diploid. So these are diploid or 2N. So these are the other cells in your body. So just exclude all the sperm and all the eggs, and these would be all the other cells in the body. And these guys are going to be 2N, so they have both copies. So the copy from mom and dad. So all the other cells in your body. So the That's going to be semantic cells. Examples would be um, on these pictures here. These are the sperm cells being shown, and this is the cell layer called simple squamous epithelium. This is something found inside your mouth. So these are the sperm cells, and you can see the egg is surrounded by all these sperm cells. This is kind of to show you the scale. So how big the egg cell is compared to the sperm cell. So egg cell is big, and sperm compared to that is very small. And then here is inside of your mouth, this tissue it can be found inside of your mouth. So I don't know if you remember doing an experiment where you had to scrape inside of your mouth and you put it on a microscopic slide, and then you added maybe some methylene blue, and you looked at those cells, and they kind of look like this. Those were your cheek cells. So this is called simple squamous epithelium that can be found inside your mouth. This is the other type of cells, or the semantic cell. As I mentioned, this is a review. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to talk about the animal cell. So we're going to ignore the bacterial cells, ignore the plant cells, the fungi, because they have, you know, they were covered in general bio. They're not related to this anatomy. So we're going to focus on the animal cell. And here is a picture of the animal cell. And this part here is called cytoplasm. So going back, what I said before, maybe you remember, what does cyto mean? So maybe you said it, cyto means cell. So cyto stands for cell. Plasm stands for gelatin or liquid stuff inside. So cytoplasm refers to the gelatinous stuff here that can be found inside the cell. So cytoplasm is comprised of cytosol. And again, cyto stands for cell, and then sol stands for liquid. So in this case, inside you have the liquid that's going to be fluid inside the cell, and this liquid is considered to be intracellular fluid of the cell. So the term intra, we will be using it many times. So intra means, so this term is going to come up, again and again. It stands for within. Okay, so in this case, if you look at this fluid, it's found within the cell. But now if you change that term to inter, that means between. So in this case, if you change it to intercellular fluid instead of intracellular fluid, then that's going to be fluid found between the cell, not within the cell. So one letter can make that big of a difference. So on the other hand, we are looking at the cytoplasm and that fluid inside. So that's called the intracellular. But if you're looking between the cells, then that's going to be called intercellular fluid if there's fluid found there. So basically, this intracellular fluid is the water dissolved in stuff like electrolytes, sodium, potassium, glucose, or hormones that are really small that get dissolved into this fluid, and that's called cytosol. And then we have cytoplasm that's comprised of cytosol, and we also said organelles. So if you remember from general biology, organelles means little organs. So just like how you have a heart, and that organ has a function, you got your lungs and your brain inside your body that performs a function. Pretend that whole cell is a body, and then they have these tiny structures that act like organs. And you got your nucleus, you got your mitochondria, you got your ribosomes, so that kind of stuff. These are kind of little organs inside of that one big organ. So they need to work or function to maintain homeostasis in the cell. So cytosol is, plus the organelles, is the cytoplasm. So cytoplasm is comprised of cytosol which is the liquid part. So I'm going to say liquid part plus the organelles, that is the solid part. So that's what cytoplasm is comprised of. So let me clear the writing. Let's go on the next slide. Okay, so now that's inside of the cell, and what keeps it from leaking outside into the environment? Well, that's called something called plasma membrane. That's what keeps it from leaking out in the environment. So plasma membrane is made up of, if you remember from general biology, phospholipids. It's made up of phospholipids. And you've got these phospholipids that has a head and a tail here. So these are the phospholipids. It's a lipid bilayer that has a head and tail. And due to their physical properties, they're able to align themselves and turn into the membrane. And that's what separates the outside from the inside. So what's frustrating is that there's actually three names for this. So there's a name called plasma membrane. Another one is cell membrane. And then maybe you didn't hear about this one, but there's another one that's called plasma lemma. So why do you need to know all three? Well, if you go ahead and Google stuff, maybe look at Wikipedia or go grab yourself an article from way back when they didn't use the word plasma membrane or cell membrane, they used the word plasma lemma instead. So if you didn't know what that meant, you'll be reading an article or textbook, you'll get really confused. So in my class, if there are two or three kinds or four kinds of words within the same structure, you have to know all of them. So please, 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 however you do it, maybe make flashcards. Don't just write one of them, write all of them when you're trying to learn. Because you're going to come across people in your career that have taken classes at different times, maybe a really long time ago, and they used a different terminology. And they might be calling it plasma lemma. So just to make sure you understand all of the terms. Cell membrane is made up of individual molecules. So this is basically just a diagram showing you how everything is broken down on the outside. You have the plasma membrane here. And then, or also known as cell membrane, also known as plasma lemma. And that's going to encase all this stuff. So in the inside, we have something called cytoplasm, which is divided into the cytosol and the organelles. And we said the cytosol is the liquid part. And then the organelles are the solid part, which is subdivided into non-membranous organelles and membranous organelles. So which means if they have membrane around them, they're called membranous organelles. If they don't have membrane around them, they're called non-membranous organelles. So we have these different organelles. Hopefully you remember these from general bio. So like cytoskeleton, microvilli, centriole, cilia, flagella, ribosomes, they don't have a membrane. They're just solid kind of molecule that's there, and they do not they do their work without the membrane. Again, this is a review from general bio. So if these names don't ring a bell, then you probably want to go back and read that chapter again, and also do the gap finders on the ANP. So it's important to know this because we're going to be learning about generic animal cell. So this is an actual cell that exists. It's not a hypothetical cell. So all those structures, they do exist. So going back to general bio, this guy here is an animal cell, and this is anywhere from 10 to 100 times larger than the bacteria. So bacteria is about the size of, maybe 10th of the size of this thing, which is maybe mitochondria. So if you look at mitochondria, maybe that's how big the bacteria is, and this is the animal cell. So we have a nucleus versus the bacteria. They do not have nucleus like this. So there's a nucleus in the center. So that's the biggest difference between animals and bacterial cells. We do not have a cell wall. We have a cell membrane. Even though this looks really complicated, I'm going to go ahead and keep coming back to this diagram and we talk about some of the most important organelles that we have here. So I won't go through all the organelles, but I'll go through the most important ones. So starting from the cell membrane, what it is, what is it? Well, as we said before, it's comprised of phospholipids. So these are the phospholipids. And it's made up of phospholipid that has a head and a tail. So phosphate head, that's the green thing here, and light bluish are the tails. That's going to be, so this is going to be the head part. It's going to be polar, and then we have a tail which is going to be non-polar, which are hydrophobic. So they don't like water. They like to stay away from water. So when you mix it all up, they're going to sort themselves and turn themselves into this membrane. So that's not the only thing we find here in addition to having the phospholipid membrane. This is called a bilayer. There are also some proteins here that exist. So you have all these molecules that are going to be either on top, or if they're going to be embedded into the membrane, or they're just going to be sitting on top of the membrane, or they be embedded into the membrane halfway. So these are the proteins. So we have a peripheral protein that's attached to the inner layer or the outer layer. So peripheral proteins, they stay on the perimeter of the other proteins. On the other hand, you have integral protein that's going to go into the cell membrane here. They're integrated into the membrane. So that's where the name kind of comes from. So it's going halfway into this membrane. So this one over here is the integral protein, but it goes, this one here goes all the way through. This is called transmembrane protein. So it's like so if you were to say something like transpacific, that means you cross the Pacific Ocean. And transmembrane means you cross one side of the membrane over to the other side of the membrane. So this is transmembrane protein. It's a type of integral protein, but it's not going halfway through, it's going all the way. So that's embedded into the membrane, and then transmembrane is crossing the membrane. So this is our next topic. So there are many functions. The reason they exist, for example, going back, or here, we can look at it here. So the reason they exist is, so you can see they have a hole in them here. So let's say this is a transmembrane protein, and there's a hole in between. So this is this is like a tunnel for chemicals to pass from one side to the other. You can also have something that's just sitting on the top, and that might be kind of a receptor, and that allows your body to be able to recognize it as being self versus non-self. So, there are reasons we have different kinds of protein. There are many different kinds of proteins that exist. So I'm going to stop here and I'm going to pick up from this slide in the next video. Thank you for listening.